So this chant is about to be amplified. This chant is one of Swami Kriyananda's songs with sort of a Celtic feel to it. And he uses it as an allegory. So it tells the story of a hill in Ireland called Tara, and this was the site of ancient kings in Ireland. So Swami uses it as an image to answer the question for us, is it all worth it? All the effort we put out, all the spiritual effort we put, is it worth it? Does it pay off in the end? Listen and you'll find the answer. Tara's brave hill so quiet, the day I came there, not a green leaf stirred on the air, not a bird did proclaim ancient grandeur and fame, only ruins, faint memories declare. I marvel to think, how can greatness e'er die? How can song disperse in the sky? How can hopes and dreams fade? How the warrior's sharp blade become dust? What's victory a lie? I stood there and pondered the great deeds of men's past, how like clouds in the sunset no glory can last. Even we, as we labor to achieve some bright end, must accept after glory that the night will descend. I've dreamed a broad rainbow over thicket and thorn, over crags that called Terry, your hopes are forlorn. All too oft in my dreaming, courage turned to despair, till I learned that success is but the courage to dare. As I gazed and thought sadly of Tara's demise, suddenly I saw her walls rise, saw her long regal halls, heard her people's brave calls, as though time had doffed a disguise. And I knew in that moment the deeds that men do never die, each victory is true. Every effort we spend gives more strength in the end, till our gladness in life's ever new. Every effort we spend gives more strength in the end, till our gladness in life's ever new.
Our readings are taken from the book Rays of the One Light, and it's actually a different cover now. Weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Self-effort, too, is needed. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. These past weeks, we have discussed the need for balancing self-effort with receptivity to divine grace. Both are important in the spiritual life. Passive dependence on grace hasn't the magnetism to attract grace. Boastful self-confidence, however, which closes itself off from the higher divine power, is shallow, brittle, and, given life's many uncertainties, susceptible to ultimate failure. There is a story in the Bible that illustrates the need to put forth personal effort so as to draw magnetically on the divine power. The story occurs in the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 8. But as he went, the crowds nearly suffocated him. Among them was a woman who had had a hemorrhage for 12 years and who had derived no benefit from anybody's treatment. She came up behind Jesus and touched the edge of his cloak. As a result, her hemorrhage stopped immediately. "Who was it that touched me?" Jesus asked, when everyone denied it. Peter remonstrated, "Master, the crowds are all around, pressing you on every side." But Jesus said, "Somebody touched me. I felt power going out from me." When the woman realized that she had not escaped notice, she came forward trembling and fell at his feet and admitted before everyone why she had touched him, adding that she had been instantaneously cured. "Daughter," Jesus said, "it is by your faith that you have been healed. Go in peace." Self-confidence and self-effort are necessary, as the ignition of a car is necessary to the motor. Of what use the ignition, however, if the motor itself will not work? Wise is he who recognizes the real power in the universe and guides his life by that supreme power. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita in the 9th chapter, "To those who meditate on me as their very own, ever united to me by incessant worship, I make good their deficiencies and render permanent their gains." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Both of us will both be sharing in the message this morning, and I'd like to begin with a reading from Whispers from Eternity. This is Yogananda's book of prayer demands and poems, and this is number 122. O all-pervading Spirit, the breeze of thy inspiration has removed every cloud from my heart. The firmament of my mind is now clear. Purified, I behold only thee everywhere. The sunshine of thy joy spreads rapidly to the farthest shores of my being. After long ages of hunger, I feed on thy light. By thy grace and by my constant wakefulness in thee, may this joy be mine forever, forever, and forever. Om, peace, amen. So our affirmation this morning on renunciation reminds me of the story of the beggar who was out all day, one day begging, and he comes home with just a tiny satchel filled with rice. And in the distance, he sees the great king walking towards him. And he starts to get excited because he starts to think, oh, I wonder what the great king is going to bring me. And then the great king comes right up to him and he opens up his hand to the beggar as if implying or asking the beggar, what are you giving me? And the beggar was a little appalled. How could the great king who has everything ask me who has so little for something? But then the beggar reaches into his tiny satchel and pulls out one grain of rice, and he hands it over to the king, and the king goes home. And then at the end of the day, the beggar empties out his little satchel of rice on his kitchen table, and he sees that one grain of rice has turned to gold. And he thought, if I had only given everything to the king. And that's such a wonderful reminder. What if we give everything to God? What if we give all that we have, all that we are? all of our thoughts, all of our hopes, our aspirations, even everything that we struggle with, everything that we think may not be so great with us, everything. What if we offered all those things to God? And in our reading this morning, it reminds us that self-effort is needed too from us, that it's not enough just to be passive in our search for God and say, okay, God, I'm ready, come to me now, right? When we think of anything else we might do in life, we put energy towards it, don't we? I was remembering when I was in college, I was majoring in marketing management, and I really wanted to work in advertising. So I got my degree. I land in San Francisco. I start looking for an advertising job. Well, I had no experience. I was in college for 4 years. I had a degree, but nobody seemed interested in that. But then I was given the advice, okay, well, why don't you get your foot in the door of a large advertising company? You could start maybe in a support position, an entry-level position. I was like, okay, I can do that. But I had no secretarial skills. Back then, there were secretaries. And so I was like, okay, well, I went and I learned how to type on a typewriter. Back then, too, we had typewriters. Do you remember those days? I worked for a large advertising company in San Francisco, and we only had 2 computers at that point, and they were really big monsters, and they were in one room, and I think they were the Wang, is that right? And you used to have to sign up if you wanted to use, and then all these secretaries, And so I learned how to do that. And I did end up getting an entry-level position as a secretary, and I moved my way into the company that way. But the same is true on the spiritual path. We can think, oh, well, I'm ready. What other effort do I need to put out? And the reading is so beautiful because it just reminds us that that effort is needed. It's so important. We talk often about the equation on the spiritual path, that we have 25% is the disciples' part, right? But then the other part is 25% is the guru's part on behalf of the disciple. And then the other 50% is the grace of God. And we can think, well, we've got 75%. That's better than I got in school. I'll just go with that. But no, it's when we do our 100%, when we give it our full effort of our 25%, that then the guru's effort and God's effort really can kick in to its fullest benefit. There's a story that Swami Kriyananda would tell of a disciple that went up to Yogananda once. And he said, will you give me the grace of devotion? Very reasonable request. It seemed like, here it is, very heart-opening and all that. And Yogananda said, no. He said, it's like you're asking me for money that you've not earned. When you go out and earn that money, then I will give it to you. Same thing here when we earn it. And it's not to be harsh or whatever, but we're just being reminded that we have to put effort towards it, okay? And it can be step by step. Just like when I tried to get into the advertising world, I did it step by step. Same thing on the spiritual path. We need to be taking those steps towards our own self-realization. We can't be passive again. Can't just say, oh, it's going to come. Oh, you know what? I think I'll meditate later. I'm a little too busy today, or I need this time, or that, or whatever. The Yogananda says the time for knowing God has come. It has come. But that means we need to put energy towards it. It's interesting that one of the first techniques we learn when we come to this path is what? It's the energization exercises, because it takes energy to know God. And it's hard. It's hard even to take that first step. But by doing those exercises, we learn how to draw an energy that's greater than what we are. We learn that we're not just this body, but we can call upon the Guru to recharge and energize our body physically, mentally, and spiritually. So then we can then sit in meditation. We can take that next step. So you can see how it's baby steps. We can also have this plan for us of self-realization. We can make that goal that I want to know God by the end of this lifetime. And so we take these steps and we do the Kriya Yoga. Yogananda promised us that if we do one Kriya as is taught, if we do it as perfectly and as is taught by him, it frees up 1 year of karma. 1 whole year can get burned up. We can burn up all these things that are holding us back from knowing God. But we have to make that effort. Self-effort too is needed. And again, it's never about making us feel bad about where we're not or what we didn't do this morning. Yogananda also would remind us it takes very, very, very good karma to even want to know God. Here we are here we are this morning. It takes very, very good karma to even want to be here. Let's keep going with that good karma. Let's make it happen. Let's do that. Let's take that next step in self-effort. And then we're reminded again in that beautiful affirmation on renunciation that when we seek Him first, all things come to us. All things will come because we find in that fulfillment in Him, the desires for all these other things, they lessen. And you can see it through the years, your own life. You can look at the things and say, that used to really catch me a couple of years ago. That really thrilled me. And then now, you know what? I don't think I need. When I was young, I wanted 3 things. I wanted a red car, I wanted to go to Hawaii and live in California. Well, I got to do all 3, and I'm like, okay, I don't need a red car anymore. I could probably go to Hawaii again, though, so I have to work on that one. But
Desire, my great enemy.
that chant was for me, believe me. But you see, there it is, even that desire for Hawaii or whatever it is, we offer it up. We have to do this with joy. We have to do this with joy. And we have to remember that God is joy. So even that we could share when we go to Hawaii. We could share our time with God. Swami Kriyananda, we were so blessed to have known him and to have had him as that example, because those of us who did know him and were around when he was alive, he had a beautiful home at Ananda Village in Northern California. Beautiful, gorgeous. And you would think, well, now I thought, what's this thing? I thought we're not supposed to have things, but that's not what the message. He always shared what he had. He shared his home at Ananda Village. He shared his home in India, in Italy. It's when we get attached to these things and we think that's what's going to bring us happiness. And we know those things don't last again. The red car breaks down. The trip to Hawaii gets canceled. These things happen. It's not if we're going to base our happiness on these things of the world. It's just, we know where that goes. Those, as the affirmation said, it was so colorful, those tempting, the bubbles. I always get it wrong. I just think of bubbles or rainbows. They don't last,
Rainbow
right?
bubbles ever ready to burst.
Yeah, they burst, ever. But then again, that reminder, if we seek God. There's a story of another king who one day decided he asked his courtiers, all of his kingsmen, he asked everyone to bring everything that he owned out into the village, into this big square. And he said, I want you to put all that I own into this big square, no matter how expensive, big, or whatever. And he made an announcement to the villagers. He said, from sunrise to sundown, anyone can come in and take whatever you want and have at it. But then they put his chair right in the middle of this area, and the king just sat in it. And so all day, he was there just all day, and people were coming, milling in and out. Ooh, should I take this? Should I take that? Whatever. It was kind of like a flea market, but very high end. And then finally, at the end of this day, this woman who obviously looked like she was very poor, didn't have a lot. She comes in, and people are looking at her and saying, well, I wonder what she's going to take. And she walks right up to the king, and she said, sir, is it true that I could ask for anything that's in this area? He said, yeah, that's what I said. And she said, well, then I choose you. And people gasped, how could you do that? And he said, of course she can do that. I'm in this circle, I'm in this area. And because she picked me first, then all these things belong to her. And that's that beautiful chant, seek God first, and all these things shall be added to us. We have no idea what treasure lies for us, what will come to us, what blessings, what gifts, once we offer ourselves in this way. So many blessings to all of you.
Could I have your book? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be together. Thank you for taking time. If you look around the room, there's a fair amount of blue. And it's a little bit odd. Who are these blue people? see people with an on. Now, not everybody's wearing blue is one of the blue people, okay? Just so you know. But there are blue people, people who wear kind of basically only blue, and it's uncommon in our culture to run across people. Oh, by the way, we didn't introduce ourselves. I should do that. For those who don't know us, I'm Nayaswami Daiva, and this is Nayaswami Gangamata. And that's part of the blue story. What's this Nayaswami stuff? About a long time ago, I found myself growing up in a fairly peculiar world, in a fairly peculiar culture. I'm still fairly convinced that I was cruising down the highway after work in the astral world and I took a wrong turn. And I think dinner's still waiting, I'm not sure. But I never really quite understood why people behaved the way they did, the kinds of interactions they held, the kinds of things that they focused on. Because it seemed like they were looking for something that those things were never going to hold. And I spent my time really asking, who has something worth having? Look around, I looked around my world and I thought, who looks whole? Who looks happy? Who looks self-controlled and self-contained? And like everything is there. You can see it. When you see it, you know it. You recognize it. They've got something. So I looked around and I would see people that had a lot of light around them. They had that confidence and that radiant glow. And then something would happen and all of a sudden they would find themselves fumbling. I thought, well, that's not it. Because I knew that whatever it was, when it was finally identified, would be indelible. And I looked and I looked and I looked and I read all the stories. I read the Dancing Woolly Masters. I read the stories of Don Juan, and I read the stories of, the drug age. I looked for any doorway that opened into an understanding of where wholeness resided. And I went through the things that people do. I went through growing up. There's a cute story called The Lupin Lady, Miss Rumphius. And the story starts off, the only reason I say it is because we abbreviate. The story starts off, there was this little girl and her grandfather said, when you grow up you should do 3 things. You should travel, you should serve meaningfully, and you should make the world a better place. And then she ate her oatmeal, did her homework, and grew up. That's what the book says. So that was the whole rest of her life. So that was the story, went to, pardon? I ate my oatmeal, I went to school, I grew up, did my homework, I got jobs, I did all kinds of things, but none of them in themselves seemed to answer the question that was dearest to my heart. And I know that we all have that same insatiable yearning for wholeness. Everybody, it's woven into the very core of our being, and we're looking for it so desperately. And as the song says, we're looking for love in all the wrong places. We're looking for it in places where it will never come. And the world is in deep, deep trouble at this time because we're trying harder and harder and harder to make the wrong things work. And we're getting farther and farther away from our centers as we try to work at the surface of things. Well, I found when somebody gave me, about 35 years ago, the autobiography of a yogi. And when I opened it, I knew that he had it. For the first time in my life, I knew that he had it. And no matter what was in that book, no matter what happened to him as a young person, as a grown-up, he never lost it. He always had that wholeness. In the midst of sorrow, in the midst of joy, in the midst of victories, in the midst of loss, in the midst of everything, he never lost that presence. And that's what I've been looking for. That's what I want. And intuitively, I knew that would define the rest of my life. But I didn't know what it meant. And I knew he was a Swami. I knew that he was a renunciate. He talked about living for God alone. I had no clue what that meant. I had no clue who God was. All I knew was I was seeking wholeness. And so the path is the path, not because God is ever far away, but because it's a process of undoing the false understandings that we have and finding what's more true, what works better, what's more real. And so step by step, I started to explore what would it be like to actually live a life that wasn't self-centered. There's a saint, I heard a quote, and I can't remember the source of it anymore, but the quote was by a saint who, as God realized, if you want everything, seek first to have nothing. If you want to be everything, seek first to be nothing. Because what happens is, the more we focus on this little identity, the more we isolate ourselves from the larger identity that's who we are. We are a part of the universe. There is no place. Another saint said, the universe is made of love, it's made of joy, it's made of wisdom, it's made of power, it's made of peace and calmness. All the things that we're always seeking, the universe is made of it. But the place of contact is deep inside. And the more we try and get those things from outside, the more we're chasing reflections instead of going to the source. It's like trying to drink a picture of a glass of water. It really is very unsatisfying. Go to the well and drink the water. Then every time you see a picture of a glass of water, you'll be reminded of that experience. But you'll never be satisfied from the pictures. Trying to find joy, trying to find love from outside always leaves us empty. It always leaves us frustrated. It never works. Fill up with love, fill up with joy from where it is, deep inside in your connection with God. And then let that fill your relationships. Let that fill your job. Let that fill the moments of your life. Renunciation is letting go of those attachments and commitments to trying to get something where it will never come. And again, as long as you're committed to that picture of the glass of water, you'll never go looking for the real glass. You'll never go looking for the well where real water can be found. And often we go, well, it wasn't that picture, and we start to gather magazines. We start to gather all these other things. Well, it wasn't there, but maybe it's here. Maybe I'll find it there. And we start to amass this enormous pile of residual detritus, of things that didn't work, but we're still not sure that they might not come to life at some point or might not work. And renunciation is simply either piecemeal or wholesale, letting go of all that stuff, all those thoughts, all those commitments, all those attitudes, to finding wholeness where it doesn't exist. It's that simple. It is often not that easy, but it is exactly that simple. And these masters, they come and they bring us the tools and techniques to start to go, and they give us the cup and they show us where the well is, and they say, all you have to do is just reach down and do this. All you have to do is sit in silence on a daily basis. Watch your breath. That's why we sit up. Anybody really pay attention when we first go to meditate? Sitting up, rolling the shoulders back, opening the heart, taking a deep breath in, lifting the energy. How do you feel when you do that? Every single person feels, if you really do it, feels more like themselves. That's the presence of God inside. That's the start of the very experience that we're all seeking. And the deeper we go into that, the more full we become. It's that simple. And that's what the world needs, hope for a better world. The second you start to tune in, every scripture is full of stories of the power of what happens when people tune into God and God's presence is allowed to play out. Is it the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah, the towns of the plains, the cities of the plains that are so corrupt, and for the sake of one righteous person, God would save those cities. One, that's the power of attunement with God, the power of being in the zone. Yogananda said, when he was alive, he said, there will be another third world war. There will be a third world war, and there will be no safe place on the planet. It's the last snowstorm of spring. It's the change, defining the final change of ages from the dark age into this age of energy. And he said there would be this great tussle that would happen between those forces that are trying to get us back into materialism, get us back into, fighting with each other because of race or religion or superficial things, and that commonality, that connection that happens through energy and through the recognition that it's God playing out in all these different forms and how wonderful and drawing the strength from these differences. He said, but all of life, even weather, responds to human consciousness. And that when people come and meditate together, they change the very course of history. He said that that war would happen well before the turning of the millennium. That was 17 years ago, and still it's not here. Because what you see is so many more people are turning toward the light. So many more people are turning toward meditation and attunement with God and service and friendship and openness and lack of divisiveness. And it's changing the course of history. Hope for a better world. Next week we celebrate that. If you haven't got your tickets yet, get them today. Because in 5 weeks, in 5 days, 6 days, we're coming together to celebrate hope for a better world through meditation, through upliftment of consciousness. And we're sharing with the Sufi tradition, and the Jewish tradition, and the Christian tradition, and the Muslim tradition. We've got all of this energy coming together, showing that each one leads to the same resource, the same point of reference, the presence of God inside. And in that, there's hope for a better world at every level. Not just avoiding the cataclysms that are pending and that we read about every single day and we become numb to, but also the great joys that life promises, great creativity and fun and friendship and answers to current needs come all from being in that stillness. I was going to talk, we're out of time, so I was going to talk about what renunciation is and go into a little bit why we wear blue and what the renunciate order is. It's very simple. It's a group of people who have decided step by step that they just really want the things that work. It's that simple. And along the way, there are resting places. It's like climbing a mountain. You want to get to the top. You know at the top you'll get this great view. There's something that changes from being up there. But nobody just levitates up to the top. You have to work your way up. And each step of the way has its own gift to give. And so there's a pilgrim's vow. And I'll read that as the closing. There's a pilgrim's vow, which is an entryway into renunciation, into self-offering. And then it goes into brahmachari, which is a step further. And then it goes, or if you're married, tyagi, and then it goes into the Swami order. If you would ask anybody who knew me as a young person, I am the least likely to be in this position at this point. But there was always one thing they would say, and that is I always was interested in truth. And truth leads to this. Truth eventually leads to the place where you realize nothing else matters. When you have renounced everything, then you can serve everything. Then you are everything. When you have renounced everything, everything becomes yours. All the joys you sought, all the things you hoped for, they become living realities. The pilgrim's vow of intention. Sit up straight, close the eyes, be in a receptive mode. Let's feel for the presence of God inside of this vow of intention. And feel what it would be like to offer that yourself. I understand and intend from now on to live by my understanding that life is a pilgrimage, of which the final goal is to find and merge back into God. I will endeavor resolutely, therefore, to direct all my thoughts and actions toward that end. I will offer up all material desires for purification in the fire of divine bliss. I will offer up all attachments for purification in that cosmic fire. I will search my heart daily for any lingering desires and attachments and will offer them to Thee, my cosmic beloved. I will strive to be an example to others of a pure, discriminating, and noble life. I will offer the fruit of all my actions and labors to Thee alone. Bless me and direct my footsteps ever to the summit of Thy holy mountain. Om Shanti. Amen. Music.